Yeah, we'll splice them. Okay, go ahead. Hold it. Cool. So, whoa, there was like Ghost Adventures. Um, okay. Anyway, so the root means to cross over. The Haberu in Sumerian, Apiru in Hebrew, or in Kemetic, and Ebri means one who's crossed over. So Eber is called one who crossed over. Midrashically, it's because Shem, his ancestor, was who Samaria was named after. So Samaria in Sumerian is pronounced Shemer. It's not pronounced Samaria. So the reason, again, with Rashi saying this is a secular history, people would have understood this as a secular, they would have known these figures. So when it talks about Shem, people would have gone, oh, Shem, the founder of Samaria, you know? They wouldn't have been like, who's this guy Shem, you know? And then interestingly, his name means name, too. And it's the name of this, you know, central place of ancient Mesopotamia. So, Shem, you know, eventually leaves, but Eber becomes like the first to follow him and cross over from Babylon. He leaves Babylon. So he crosses over the rivers and leaves, but he also crosses over culturally and goes back to the land of Canaan, where the Torah begins and where it ends. So then the next person to be called a Hebrew is Abraham. It says Abraham the Hebrew. But he's a Hebrew not just because he's from Eber, but because he follows Eber. He crosses over. Literally, it's a word, you know? It's a, you know, he crosses over. So in Sumerian too, Haberu, it's the same root. Ayin B or Bet and Resh, or in Arabic, Ayin Ba Ra. So it means to cross over. So he crosses over, and then I totally forget what the point of that was. Oh yeah, the Hiram key thing, and they're talking about the Haberu and Apiru. Yeah, absolutely. But it's not just like, sometimes people hear that and they say, that's where it came from. But yeah, it's where it came from. It's just the cognate. It's just literally the Sumerian cognate with it, and the meaning's the same. So here's the interesting part. That was all interesting, you know. But Nibiru is you got the famous Zachariah Sitchin, and he famously mistranslates everything Sumerian really poorly, and he mistranslates it really well, I guess, if you're going for mistranslating. But he adds a lot of stuff, so that's why it's bad. He just adds stuff that isn't there. But he calls Nibiru the planet of crossing, and it doesn't mean that. It means the place of crossing. And if you want to get technical with the prefix, it could mean the place to which we cross. So anyone who knows Hebrew and Arabic, and, you know, will notice that prefix would literally mean like our crossing, you know. So it doesn't necessarily mean planet. It seems to contextually mean planet. So that's the weird Zachariah Sitchin thing, but he screws that up a bit. But it's the same root, so it's crossing, you know. But yeah. So any more? You want to camera two him?
So there's a theory out there that Moses was actually like the second son of the Pharaoh, and that there was a famine going on in Egypt, and his mission as the second son was, your older brother's probably going to run Egypt, so we're having a famine, and if you take these 10 or 12 tribes out into the desert, you'll at least have a chance to sink or swim out there.
Yeah.
And
that's interesting.
That was the uniting of the 10 or 12 separate tribes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm really more of a pro Akhenatenist. I really think that there was a legitimate divide between the traditionalists and the Akhenatenists, and that Akhenaten was just literally this radical panentheist, not a pantheist, but a panentheist, you know. And his notion of the oneness of God was so radical and controversial. I mean, literally, his name was banned. You couldn't even say his name. You know, so I'm really convinced of Moses being Akhenaten, and as such, I wouldn't really be convinced by a theory that there was some collaboration with the traditionalists in Egypt between Moses or the historical Moses and them, because I think there was legitimately a beef, and I think like Akhenaten and his folks, they got out of there and created a new center in Egypt, at first, and then it became more radical, and even where does he flee to? We think of the land of Canaan like it was just this place and Egypt couldn't touch him. Canaan was under Egyptian control at the time and for many centuries after. So they were still within Egypt. Even when they went over there, it was just a more remote part of the Egyptian empire. That's something that for some reason people just don't pay attention to, but it's a well documented matter of history. Okay, camera 2.
So I was just wondering, we had talked earlier about the Epic of Gilgamesh and some of the parallels between Gilgamesh and Moses. If he was the second son and he led the tribes out, and then later attempts to try to unite things together, and they borrowed things from the different legends from Babylon and other places like the Ten Commandments. There's theories out there that were the 10 laws of Samaria before Moses ever went up and came down from Mount Sinai. And that as the second son, he was trained how to run a country. And, this is how they do it over here, this is how I do it over there. So when he had difficulty trying to keep these 10 or 12 separate tribes together, he just said, okay, I'm going to just tell you what not to do. You're the children of Israel. You can't communicate. You don't understand. We don't even speak the same languages necessarily. So I'm going to tell you what not to do, just to keep us together and as a functional unit.
Yeah. Well, there's something to that. I mean, none of them, except for the beginning of them, the radical oneness of the divine, none of them are particularly new, and even those weren't new ideas either. But yeah, I mean, they definitely were general prohibitions. They're prohibitions that he would have been aware of before then. I highly doubt it was like a startling revelation to Moses that people shouldn't murder, or that they should be good to their parents, or that they shouldn't covet their neighbor's wife. I think these were an answer to the problems that were being faced by the tribes, in the Exodus account. Each of those was something, so the radical oneness was a response to the way that they viewed the world and the division and unrelatedness of the forces of nature and the world that they were in. There's a God for this, there's a God for that, and basically a disconnected, disjointedness rather than seeing it all as the Tao, that becomes first, and it becomes like one of the most complexly articulated of the commandments, and then that ends up bleeding into many other of the commandments, and ultimately, really, it bleeds into all of them in that. All of the moral laws then stem from that notion of oneness. So that has to come first, because the notion of oneness includes you and I, and the falseness of you and I as a dichotomy, So I think the basis for it is what's different, what's revelatory, as opposed to just saying, here's these rules. It's saying these rules reel from this notion of oneness, and I'm sure it wasn't the first time that people heard those rules, but I don't think he just came out and said, here's 10 rules, and they were real short, and that was the end of the discussion. They'd be like, you were fasting for 40 days, and you come back with that, and that's all you had? Just 10, I think there was a sermon on each of them and on that notion of oneness, and then how those existing laws reeled from that, and why that was important. So I mean, again, like we talked about earlier, like with Hillel and standing on one foot and saying the Torah, and basically saying the negative affirmation of the golden rule. You know, Jesus ends up modifying it a little bit. So he ends up saying, you know, basically, you've all heard about Hillel's thing, you know, that which is detestable to you, don't do unto others. So he changes it, makes it even harder to follow. He says, you know, do unto others what you would want them to do unto you. So that's harder than what Hillel was saying. So, excuse me. So Hillel, you know, he wasn't saying not to do unto others what, you know, he just didn't think of it in that formulation. And Jesus probably wouldn't have either, unless it were for Hillel making that widely known statement. And then, you know, he's responding like, let's throw it up. You know, let's kick it up a notch. Let's up the ante, you know, and make it, you know, even more based on that concept of oneness. So according to Hillel, the whole Torah, all of the mitzvah, all of it basically condenses into that. Now, why do we not do unto our neighbor that which is detestable to us? Or, you know, the other way. Why do we do unto others what we would have them do unto us? Because of that oneness. So ultimately, that's what it boils down to, is all of the mitzvot of the Torah, not just even those 10, all reel from that notion of oneness. Oneness with the divine, with the Tao, with our neighbor. Because we're all part of the Tao. There's a great statement attributed to Lao Tzu where he's talking about the Tao, and some dude hears him talking to his disciples about the Tao and how it pervades everything. It's, you know, and they I guess they have like a, you know, some sort of animal with them, and there's a pile of shit on the ground, and he says, "Is it even in the shit?" And he says, "Yes, even in that," you know. And it, to someone who understands that, that's not radical. That's not like, whoa, yeah, you know. It's like, of course, yeah. But to someone who is coming from a perspective of separation from the Creator, you know, God in the sky, humans down below, oh God, bestow upon us rain. We'll sacrifice this virgin, you know, we'll do whatever, you know. We've angered you because we've, you know, someone coming from that notion, that perspective, which the tribes were coming from, you know, that sort of thing, like, oh, it's even in shit. God's in shit. God's in, you know, everything. It's, you know, no, you know, but not even in everything, but that everything, and this is what I mean by the difference with panentheistic, but that ultimately everything's within God, which is, you know, ultimately the notion that is being discussed, that, and I would add, everything's within the mind, the construct of the mind of what the divine really is, and that this is all part of the pure stream of consciousness, you know. In which case, it shouldn't be controversial with someone who would object with the pantheistic view that God is in everything, because God is only in everything pantheistically insofar as everything is panentheistically in the mind of God. So, of course, God's in, you know, when you have a dream, you're in everything in that dream. You're in, if you dream about a glass of water on a table, you're in that table and the glass of water and the water in it. If someone comes up and talks to you in that dream, you're in that person. You know, that's not controversial. It shouldn't be, right? So everything in there is real in that it is a real thought creation. So if we have that much capacity for consciousness, then how much more so does the universe itself, which contains all of our consciousness. So an atom contains protons, neutrons, and electrons. Nobody could look at an atom and say, that's an atom, yeah, but I don't think it has any electrons. You know, you'd be like, well, no, it does. I mean, it's an atom. So it not only has all of those parts, but it also has transcendent properties that emerge when they're all one, when we understand them as one. So for somebody to say, God, I believe in a higher power, but I don't think it's conscious. It has to be conscious because we're conscious. And if it's one, if we accept that it's all one, then it has to at least be as conscious as all of the consciousness in it. An atom has to at least have all the properties that each electron added to each electron added in it has. And then it has more properties too. And then it has the transcendent properties that emerge when they're all together. So the universe itself has to at least have as much consciousness as every sentient being in the universe added together. But in reality, when we look at things empirically, we can only deduce that the universe as a holon, just like everything in the universe as a holon, has to also have transcendent properties that emerge from the unity of it. So not just the consciousness of everything, but even transcendent properties of consciousness that we can't fathom because we're just parts in it. You can only fathom the transcendent properties if you're outside of it. So we can only fathom the transcendent properties of the protons, neutrons, and electrons combined into an atom because we're outside of that atom. So since we're inside of the divine mind, we can only comprehend as much consciousness as we can perceive in the divine mind. We can never comprehend the consciousness of the totality, nor the transcendent properties that emerge because we're not outside of it to observe those transcendent properties. So all we know is that as much as we think we know and are aware, it's so much more aware because it's more than us and we're in it. So as the Tian Shi said 2,000 years ago in China, the Tian Shi in their commentary that we call the how do you say it? The Shang Air, or the Zhang Air, I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it, is the abbreviated commentary on the Tao Te Ching, which they literally saw as related to their movement. Literally, that every verse in the Tao Te Ching was literally about their movement. You know, one of the coolest groups in history. Basically, Chinese Essenes in the same era as the Essenes. On the other side of the world doing the same thing. You know, amazing group. And as we talked about earlier, related by the grandson of the founder with the Taiping movement, or the Yellow Turban movement. So as they said, the Tao thinks of you. That's part of the long title of their commentary. The Zhang Air is the abbreviated title. I can't remember the whole title. But it basically means the Tao thinks of you. That was their notion. The Tao thinks of you. I mean, it's turning on its head what the philosophical speculative school of Taoism that predated them would have said. That we think of the Tao. We're thinking of the Tao. We're reflecting on the Tao. No, the Tao thinks of you. You know, amazing group. Camera 2.
So you're talking about the consciousness being greater than the sum of its parts, which I think that's mirrored in Chinese medicine. We have 10 organs, but 12 meridians. We have the 2 extra, the pericardium, or the sex circulation, or heart governor, heart protector, and its paired organ, the triple warmer, triple heater, Sanjiao. One being the blood and the vessels that it's contained in, and the other being the vitality in it, the endocrine system, roughly. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, amazing conclusion. Yeah, that was perfect. You can hit that